Wait. That song is still playing. Greetings. Hello, everybody. Greetings to the folks watching on YouTube, on Periscope, on Twitch, and on Facebook. Good morning, or I guess it's afternoon for me. Afternoon for everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. The song you were just listening to, I'm about to mangle the name of the song, but I was like getting it while I was like off screen because it's so lit. But it's called De De Mwen Kale, and it's a song that dates all the way back to the Haitian Revolution. It's a song that enslaved African people sang when they were fighting for their liberation during the Haitian Revolution. And I wanted to play that song for y'all because today is the International Day of Solidarity with Haiti, called for by the Haiti Action Committee. And today on the show, we're going to be talking about U.S. Haiti relations and why the U.S. needs to get the fuck up out of Haiti. So I just wanted to play that song so we can ground ourselves in the history of Haitian resistance for this conversation. But hello, everybody. Hi, Hope. Hello. Hi, Bird. Hi, Kevin. Good to see y'all. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Onya Sanu. I am a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, specifically the New Mexico chapter of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and this is our show, Weekly Pan-African News. We've been doing this for a year, since the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic here in the United States. We have been having a lot of in-person events with our community, lots of political education, lots of building, and then COVID hit and we were like, damn, like we can't bring people together because our African people are going to get deeply impacted by this virus, but we still want to build with our people, so what can we do? And this show is one of the many ways that we came up with to keep building with y'all. So we do this every single Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. And every single episode of the show, we cover a different topic in depth from a revolutionary African perspective. Today, that topic is going to be Haiti, specifically U.S.-Haiti relations. But first, we always open the show with a couple of things. The intro that I just did, where I talk about who the heck are, like, who. Also, I want to mention that the All African People's Revolutionary Party, my political home, is a revolutionary Pan-African socialist political party based in Africa, founded in Africa 52 years ago by Mr. Kwame Nkrumah, the first democratically elected president of Ghana after it gained its independence from Britain. Our political objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. And so this show is coming to y'all from a revolutionary Pan-African perspective because that is the politics of the APRP. But the other thing that we always do, in addition to the intro, is that we want to call in an ancestor. And the reason why we do that, and we do it every single show, we also do libations at the beginning of work study. We do libations and calling in ancestors at the beginning of our events. And the reason why we do that, and also if I would just put on lipstick, I was trying to be presentable for y'all. But if I have lipstick in my teeth, let me know in the comments. Let me know. Also, thank you, Bird. I just got my hair done for my birthday. So yeah, so we call in an ancestor, we do libations because we understand as revolutionary African people, as people fighting for African liberation, that we are part of a continuum of struggle that began the very first moment, the very first European colonizer set foot on the shores of Africa hundreds of years ago. We are not starting a new movement. We are building upon a movement that already exists, which means that the people that came before us, the African people that fought for our liberation, that fought against colonialism, that fought against imperialism, that fought against capitalism through the centuries, they laid the groundwork for the APRP to exist, for me to be speaking to y'all, for us to do the work that we do. And so understanding that, understanding the legacy of work that we're a part of, understanding the people that made it possible for us to be here, we would be remiss not to celebrate them. We would be remiss not to uplift them. And obviously in this society, if you're a revolutionary African person, particularly a revolutionary African non-man or woman, people are just gonna lie on you, dog. They're gonna lie on you constantly. They're gonna misrepresent what you believed and who you were. And so calling in our ancestors, centering our ancestors, honoring our ancestors is our way of celebrating them, but also telling the truth about them because, man, capitalism lies all of the time, especially when it comes to Africa and African people. So the ancestor that we want to call in today is Miss Fannie Lou Hamer. I so hope you have heard that name before, but if you haven't, it's okay because I'm going to explain who she was. She was born on October 6th, 1917. She passed on March 14th, 1977. So this past Sunday was the anniversary of her passing. And she was a revolutionary African woman born in the U.S. South who organized around the fight for the right to vote in the U.S. She was a militant, revolutionary African woman who was closely associated with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that we have discussed at length many times before on the show. My comrade Ajamu Umi, who is actually in the California chapter of the APRP, he recruited me into the APRP in Oregon, wrote an article about Fannie Lou Hamer. I just want to read a little bit from that article because it really breaks down why she was so incredible. So, without further ado, let me get into this. Fannie Lou Hamer is a textbook poster of the proper approach for utilizing the vote. I just told y'all that she was deeply involved in the fight for the right to the vote, so this article is going to be talking about that. So something that is not even remotely considered today, not to mention implemented. Ms. Hamer was an extremely poor sharecropper in rural Mississippi. She was a proud woman who saw her deep belief in Jesus as a pillar of strength against oppression. In other words, Ms. Hamer didn't rely on her faith as a crutch or justification to exist in an alternate universe, as many so-called Christians, Muslims, etc. do on a regular and accepted basis today. Instead, she saw Christianity as the vehicle that would properly empower her to become a larger-than-life figure on the civil rights stage. In 1962, Ms. Hamer made a decision that could be life-threatening. She decided to attend a meeting of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee being held in rural Mississippi. In that meeting, SNCC organizers exalted the local people to come together to challenge Mississippi's racist tradition of disenfranchisement of African voters. Disenfranchisement means that they wouldn't allow us to vote. So the SNCC organizers were extremely practical in their inoculation process. Years later, Kwame Ture, a leading SNCC organizer in their Mississippi projects, recalled that a very sober discussion took place in those meetings where it became clear that everyone standing up could and probably would become faced with crippling economic hardship and even death. Ms. Hamer, relying on her unquestionable belief in God, never hesitated in volunteering to become one of the local people to heed SNCC's call, fight for the right to vote. Despite having a third-grade education and no previous organizing experience, Ms. Hamer became fully engrossed in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's work. Her decision to do so was overwhelmingly costly for her. The European landowner where she and her husband sharecropped immediately evicted them for their work once they became aware of the voter registration organizing they were doing. Ms. Hamer and her husband were forced to move in with other local people, and the resulting financial hardships created tension in their marriage, but Fannie Lou Hamer continued undeterred. In June of 1963, Ms. Hamer and other SNCC activists were engaged in creating the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which they saw as a political vehicle to challenge the hegemony of the racist Democratic and Republican parties on Mississippi politics. Pause. So very, very important to understand about the fight for the right to vote that was led by Fannie Lou Hamer and led by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They were fighting against European settler terrorism to organize these Africans to vote. They were going from community to mobilize and organize African people around the right to vote, but they were not organizing those people around the right to vote so they could vote for the goddamn Democratic Party. They never did that. When you look at interviews with former SNCC members like Kwame Ture, they always said that clearly. We were not organizing people, registering them to vote so they could vote for Democrats. We were organizing people, registering them to vote so they could form their own independent political party. The Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party was an independent African political party. These Africans were not being registered to vote for Democrats. They were being registered to vote for their own goddamn party. Okay, let me continue. I just want to make that clear because these days when we talk about the right to vote, we talk about our ancestors died so we could vote for Democrats. No, our ancestors died for the right to vote so we could build independent political power. Anywho, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee idea was that the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was to create opportunities for African people to run for local political offices, to become nominated to represent the state of Mississippi in state and national political decision making. While traveling to a Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party conference at the time, Ms. Hamer and other activists were stopped by police in Winona, Mississippi. She was jailed, and it was there that two police coerced two African men who had been incarcerated there for over a month into beating her. They beat her severely after they arrested her for organizing the right to vote. She was beaten so badly that she needed over a month to recover, and the two men who beat her suffered health issues themselves for the amounts of energy they expended in brutalizing her. Still, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Ms. Fannie Lou Hamer, were not to be intimidated. As SNCC continued to push against racist repression practices within the electoral process, it became evident that all the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's work had created the conditions where the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party had a chance to seat delegates at the 1964 Democratic Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Fannie Lou Hamer gave a very, very famous internationally televised speech at the Democratic National Convention in 1964, where she talked about being beaten by those Africans that had been hired by police in order to intimidate her against organizing for the right to vote. And she said, I will not be intimidated. You are going to seat the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party delegates. And that testimony led to an immeasurable wave of support in favor of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party's efforts. So Fannie Lou Hamer was a badass woman. She took on incredible repression in retaliation for the organizing she was doing with SNCC, for the organizing she was doing around the right to vote, for the organizing she was doing to build independent political power for African people, and she was undeterred. She continued the fight. She represented SNCC. She continued that organizing. She is someone who is very, very famous for the approach to grassroots organizing she took. In addition to the history I just laid out of how SNCC and Ms. Hamer built independent political power in the U.S. South, she also traveled at the invitation of the first democratically elected president of Guinea after Guinea gained independence, Sékou Touré, to Africa to learn about anti-colonial struggles on the continent. Fannie Lou Hamer went to Guinea upon the invitation of Sékou Touré. They learned about anti-colonial struggles in Africa, and when they came back, Fannie Lou Hamer and SNCC began to make intentional connections between what Africans were fighting for in the U.S. South and what Africans were fighting for in Africa. So she was a revolutionary African woman. She organized for independent political power. She helped form independent African political organizations, and she was a revolutionary internationalist with intentional ties to the African continent. That is Fannie Lou Hamer. That is why we lift her up. That is why we learn from her and from SNCC's example. She was fighting for independent political power for African people. Do not ever tell me, ever, if you ever come to me, you tell me that my ancestors died for the right for me to vote for a Democrat, I'm going to cuss you out, because that's not what they did. They were fighting to build independent political power, and Fannie Lou Hamer and SNCC were using the vote as a tactic to build, again, independent African political power. So Fannie Lou Hamer is the ancestor we called in. I hope you learned a little bit from Ajamu's article. I was reading a little bit fast because I do tend to speak fast. So I'm going to drop the link to the article in the chat, and y'all can check that out on your own. Boop, boop, boop. Can't type it. But there you go. It's in the chat. So what are y'all saying? Good morning, Michelle. Thanks for joining. Brown Beret Comrade. Chris is asking about the president of Tanzania. Yep, he just passed from, they're saying it was heart disease. Some people are speculating it was COVID. The president of Tanzania passed from because he was like a COVID denier. But yep, that just happened. His vice president is taking power. She's actually, people are calling the first woman president in East Africa, but she's actually the second. Let's see. Monica says, Fannie Lou Hamer, thank you, ancestors. I've learned so much from you and continue the organizing of our ancestors. Points. Okay, cool. So that was the ancestor, Miss Fannie Lou Hamer. The other part of the show that we always do every single episode is that we want to acknowledge that we are on stolen land. The entire Western Hemisphere was stolen from indigenous nations that are still here and that are still fighting for their land. I'm speaking to y'all from Albuquerque. Albuquerque was the name that Spanish colonizers gave this land after they stole it. But Albuquerque belongs to the Tiwa Nation. All of Albuquerque was built on Tiwa land. The Tiwa Nation is still here. The Tiwa Nation still owns this land. And the Tiwa Nation is going to get their land back, just like African people are going to get our land back in Africa. Just like Palestinians are going to get their land back in occupied Palestine. Just like indigenous Australian people are going to get their land back in Australia. Land back. We are speaking to y'all from stolen land. And we are going to fight in every way possible to get that stolen land returned to the rightful owners. So that was the land acknowledgement. Point blank, period. Land back, not a metaphor. Literally give the land back from Africa to Turtle Island. And now let's get into the meat of the show, y'all. The meat. The political education section of our program, Weekly Pan-African News. Every single episode, we do political education. We do PE, y'all. You will never come to an all-African People's Revolutionary Party event anywhere in the world, whether it's in Ghana, whether it's in St. Vincent, whether it's in Toronto, whether it's in Albuquerque, without having some aspect of political education. We are a propaganda party. Political education is the core of what we do. We understand that you cannot organize a sleeping people. You must wake them up, and then you're going to get some action, as Malcolm X said. And so political education is how we wake our people up, y'all. And so as I mentioned at the top of the show, today is March 18th. And Haiti Action Committee, a Haiti solidarity organization, has called for a day of solidarity with Haiti. I'm going to read from their press release about the day to give y'all some context. I'm going to get into the meat of the show. So again, this is from a press release from Haiti Action Committee calling for this day of solidarity. Haiti Action Committee says, 10 years ago, on March 18th, 2011, former president of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, his wife and colleague, and their 2 children returned from forced exile in South Africa. Tens of thousands of people lined the streets of Port-au-Prince, which is the capital of Haiti, and poured into the courtyard of their home to greet them, seeing in their return a renewal of hope for a democratic and just Haiti. In honor of that day and to demonstrate our resolve to support the people's movement in Haiti, we, the undersigned organizations, which include Haiti Action Committee, as well as the African People's Revolutionary Party, as well as the Answer Coalition, and Buy-in USA, Bay Area Youth Arts, like many organizations, I'll share this press release, are calling for this day of solidarity with Haiti, March 18th, 2021. Let me share this with y'all so you can check it out. And then let's get into why Haiti needs our solidarity right now. After I finish that. Okay, so that's in the chat. Check out the press release when you have a chance. Again, March 18th is the anniversary of the day Jean-Bertrand Aristide came back to Haiti in 2011. After being overthrown by the U.S. government in a coup, he came back to wild support within the country of Haiti. And so on the anniversary of his return to his home, Haiti Action Committee called for this day of solidarity. So let's talk about why Haiti needs our solidarity. And in order to have that conversation, I'm going to talk to y'all about what Haiti-U.S. relations have looked like since the Haitian Revolution. I also want to add really quickly, so I don't really be talking about myself because, I don't know, there's a lot of reasons, but I don't really talk about myself. But something you should know about me is that I actually have a Haitian background. My dad is from Haiti. My dad got deported to Haiti. It's not funny. Kind of fucked up. But yeah, he got deported to Haiti right before the earthquake in the 2000s. My mom is from Honduras. I did not grow up with my dad, so I didn't really feel like a deep connection to Haitian culture. But my name is French. And so even though I did not feel that connection to Haitian culture, because guy grew up with my mom is from Honduras, who's Garifuna, people could tell off top where I grew up in Massachusetts that I had Haitian origins because of my French ass name. And I actually when I was growing up, encountered a lot of anti-Haitian sentiment from other African people. And for the longest time, I was like, I don't understand. They would see my slave name, which is French, and be like, oh, Haitian. And I'm like, damn, why? What's all the antipathy? And then when I grew up and I became radicalized and I learned more about Haitian history, what I realized is that because Haiti fought to liberate itself, because Haiti fought a revolution, the United States and Western powers in response intentionally spread anti-Haitian sentiment, not just among African people, but among the entire population of their nations. And so what I was experiencing as a child with the French name that people could tell was Haitian was just the consequences of what that intentionally spread propaganda. They created an antipathy towards Haitian people among the diaspora and among other colonized populations because they were terrified of the example that Haiti presented for folks struggling for our liberation. So yeah, my father's from Haiti, my mother's from Honduras. I identify as Garifuna because that's the culture I grew up with. But I the more I learn about Haiti, the prouder I am of that heritage. So I just wanted to share that with y'all really quickly. But as I just mentioned, Haiti fought for its liberation. Haiti is the first nation in the world to ever be born from an enslaved African uprising. That uprising was, of course, the Haitian Revolution. They won their independence in January 1st, 1804, after a 14-year campaign led by Toussaint Louverture. As I mentioned, Haiti became the first state in the world to be formed from an enslaved African uprising. It was also the first state in the world to abolish chattel slavery. It was not Britain. It was not the United States. It was an African nation in the Western Hemisphere that formed after a successful enslaved African uprising that was the first modern state in the world to abolish slavery. Put that on Haiti, credit Haiti for that, because Haiti was the first in this hemisphere to do it. And then another fact about Haiti is that after it gained its independence after the revolution in January 1st, 1804, it became the second republic in the Western Hemisphere. Haiti gained its independence and became a nation only 28 years after the United States, after the American Revolution. So Haiti has some clout in its resistance, y'all. First state to abolish slavery, first state to be formed by an enslaved African uprising, and the second republic ever formed in the Western Hemisphere, thanks to the Haitian Revolution. So Haiti has some historical clout, and you can see as we get into this history, why the United States, which was built with slavery and genocide of indigenous peoples, would have some feelings about Haiti. So after Haiti gained its independence after the Haitian Revolution, slave owners all over the world, in the United States and all over the world, panicked. Like, one really important thing to understand about slavery is that enslaved African people were fighting back against child slavery from the very beginning, like continuously. We fought back in Africa, we fought back on the ships, and we fought back throughout the Western Hemisphere in the United States, throughout the Caribbean, and throughout Central and South America. So the Haitian Revolution was not an isolated incident. The Haitian Revolution was part of a wave of resistance to chattel slavery. And the Haitian Revolution was the first enslaved African uprising to form a nation. And so you can see why slave owners at the time were like, God damn. Like, if the other Africans see this and realize they can do this, this is going to be very, very, very bad for us. The Haitians defeated not just the French, they defeated Napoleon's damn army, y'all. Not just the French, but also the British and the Spanish to win their liberation. So these were Africans that were drastically outnumbered, drastically outgunned, up against massive empires, and they won. And so slave owners saw that. They saw that example, and they were like, if other Africans realize they are capable of this, it is going to be very, very, very bad for us. And so these slave owners in the United States, in France, in Europe, collaborated to attempt to repress Haiti, to attempt to repress the example of Haiti. And so the history of the context for what is happening in Haiti right now in 2021 begins with the Haitian Revolution, begins specifically with the response of imperialist powers to the Haitian Revolution. They needed to punish Haiti for what it had done so it could not provide an example to other African and colonized people. So what did they do? After Haiti, the Haitian Revolution defeated France, Britain, and Spain. Well, European powers collaborated with France to blackmail Haiti into paying back the money that France lost when those enslaved Africans liberated themselves. They literally made Africans in Haiti pay for themselves, pay for the cost that France would have made by enslaving them. So that ended up being $21 billion in modern money, in modern funds, and it took them like over 100 years to pay that back. They finally paid it back in the early 20th century. In addition to that, Haiti was the first nation ever sanctioned by the U.S. government. The very first nation to be economically sanctioned by the U.S. government was Haiti, by U.S. President Thomas Jefferson. They prevented Haiti from importing and exporting anything. They cut off Haiti from all trade for a year. First nation ever sanctioned by the United States was Haiti, and it was done in retaliation for the Haitian Revolution. Additionally, the U.S. government took years to recognize Haiti as a republic, to recognize Haiti's sovereignty. Again, because they were terrified. These colonizers were terrified by the example that Haiti represented. A free African nation that had liberated itself. They were like, oh, hell no. We got to do something about this. So yeah, they cut off Haiti from trade. They sanctioned it. They refused to recognize its independence for years. This is all in direct retaliation. This is all to discourage other enslaved African people and other colonized people from following Haiti's example. Despite all of this immediate repression that Haiti faced for liberating itself, the Haitian Revolution and the masses of African people in Haiti still showed up in solidarity with the rest of the African diaspora. And I have said many times before, and sometimes when I say it, people get mad, but I'm going to say it forever because it's true. I have said many times before that every single person of African descent in the Western Hemisphere owes Haiti a debt. And what I mean by that is that not only did Haiti liberate itself and provide a very, very powerful example of resistance that we all learned from and built from at the time, but after Haiti gained its independence, it announced to the world that any enslaved African person that could make it to Haiti's shores would be free in Haiti. They opened up their borders to every enslaved African person in the Western Hemisphere. And they said, if you can make it to Haiti, you will be a free person. Haiti did that. Additionally, they provided assistance to anti-colonial struggles throughout the Caribbean and Central and South America. A really famous example is the struggle against Spanish colonialism in Venezuela that was led by Simón Bolívar. Haiti provided Simón Bolívar with supplies and resources in order to wage that struggle against the Spanish in Venezuela. And all they asked for in exchange is that Simón Bolívar abolish slavery in Venezuela after he won Venezuela's independence. So Haiti was assisting anti-colonial struggles throughout the Western Hemisphere. And they were saying, if you want our help, you have to abolish slavery. Because Haiti understood that their liberation was tied to the liberation of every single enslaved African person in this part of the world. Are you beginning to understand what I mean? when I say every enslaved African person owes Haiti a debt, because they didn't just free themselves and then hide. They were like, no, we got to free all these African people. And then, so not only did Haiti say, if you are an enslaved African person, you make it to Haiti, you're free. Not only did Haiti assist the anti-colonial struggles in order to compel the people leading those struggles to abolish slavery in those territories, but also Haiti petitioned the U.S. government to end slavery in the United States. Haiti did that. Haiti lobbied to liberate enslaved African people in the United States. Haiti showed up for us, y'all. Haiti always has. Haiti always has. As the U.S., as Europe, as today the core group in the UN, loot and oppress Haiti, Haiti has always shown up in solidarity with African people all over this hemisphere. And so that I literally mean we owe Haiti a debt because Haiti showed up for us, y'all. Haiti showed up for us. Haiti fought for us. Haiti was being attacked by multiple empires, and Haiti still fought to end slavery all over this hemisphere. So Haiti has shown up for us. Period. We owe Haiti. So that's some context. Haitian Revolution, Haitian solidarity of the African diaspora, the slave owners' response. And so now let's get into how history has developed in U.S.-Haiti relations. A really important thing to understand is that the U.S. has never stopped fucking with Haiti. They have never stopped. They collaborated with France to blackmail Haitians into paying back for liberating themselves. They sanctioned Haiti and cut them off from trade. They refused to recognize Haiti's sovereignty. And so this relationship of attempting to manipulate and control and repress Haiti has continued for the entirety of U.S.-Haiti relations. The next point in history I want to talk about is the two U.S. occupations of Haiti. The first one happened from 1915 to 1934. I believe it was under President Woodrow Wilson, the same dude that showed motherfucking Birth of a Nation in the White House. Racist motherfucker. But he directed U.S. troops to occupy Haiti for 19 years. 19 years. Thousands of African people in Haiti were killed. These U.S. soldiers were straight up lynching people. You have to understand, the soldiers that occupied Haiti by the U.S. government for 19 years, they were from the U.S. South. So these are like racist Jim Crow ass motherfuckers that were in this free African nation. And they terrorized the masses of people in Haiti. They killed thousands of Africans. They straight up lynched people. They dissolved the Haitian legislature and government and put in place a puppet government. They straight up stole Haiti's wealth, like Citigroup. Citigroup expropriated Haiti's motherfucking wealth during the U.S. occupation. And like I mentioned, the soldiers that occupied Haiti for the U.S. government for 19 motherfucking years, y'all, they came from the U.S. South. They were racist Jim Crow motherfuckers. They referred to the Haitians as N-words that speak French. So the same kind of treatment that those racist ass crackers were given to African people in the U.S. South, they went to Haiti and they did the same motherfucking shit there in the name of imperialism. That is the first U.S. occupation of Haiti. And then the second U.S. occupation of Haiti that was done in collaboration with the UN began in June 2004 and is on motherfucking going. After the U.S.-backed coup that overthrew Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the man I talked about at the beginning of the program, the U.S. and the UN occupied Haiti beginning in June 2004 and continuing to the present day. So some important things to understand about the coup that overthrew John Aristide in 2004 is that same man, so Jean-Bertrand Aristide is a progressive African man, a member of the Lavalas Party, which is a revolutionary party in Haiti, a democratic socialist, who when he came to power twice, was president 2 times, attempted to nationalize Haiti's resources, provide them with social services, and basically like organize Haiti's government in such a way that it actually provided like benefits for Haitian people. In the United States, because they had a long history of like looting Haiti, were like, no, thank you. So they overthrew that same dude 2 times, y'all. 2 times! They overthrew Jean-Bertrand Aristide. He was democratically elected by the Haitian people. They chose him. And the U.S. overthrew his government 2 times. The first time it happened in 1994 under, I think it was Bush, the first Bush. They overthrew his government for the first time after he had been democratically elected. And then they put in a dictator. And then in 2004, he was elected again. And they overthrew him again and put in another dictator. So every single time that Haitians have attempted to democratically elect the leadership they want, the leadership that's going to represent their interests, the U.S., the UN, and the core group, which I'm going to talk about in a second, have come in and overthrown that person, y'all. They did it 2 times for the same motherfucking guy. Haitians still love him to this day. They looked at him 2 times, and the U.S. was like, no, thank you. No, thank you. We don't want a democratic socialist in power. We don't want a Haitian president that's going to serve the interests of Haitian people. So we're going to overthrow your ass, occupy the country, and put in a dictator. They did that 2 times to the same motherfucking person. So let's talk about the U.S., the UN, and the core group in Haiti. I've already kind of described like what the U.S. and Haiti relationship is like. The UN and core group, however, are the other 2 forces that are really, really involved in keeping Haiti down, yo. Also, Max says Hillary Clinton is going to hell. Correct. Yes, for many reasons. For looting Haiti, but also for many, many other things. Also, I hate that lady. But what is the core group? So the core group is a group. It's like an organization that has no website. It has like no Twitter handle. There's no like, you can't go to their meetings. It's like a secret group that like exists out in the open that like runs Haiti's government basically. So the core group is composed of representatives from the UN Secretary General, as well as the Organization of American States, which is basically just like a puppet group in Central and South America that like is accountable to the United States. It's like constantly like helping overthrow people's governments. Like when Evo Morales was overthrown in Bolivia, it was the Organization of American States that it said that he had come to power through election fraud. And then after he was already out of power, they were like, oh, psych, there was no fraud. But that's what the Organization of American States does. It's basically just like an arm of U.S. imperialism in Central and South America. They do what the United States wants. The United States wants the president out, like Maduro in Venezuela or Morales in Bolivia. The OAS provides the pretext required for the United States to accomplish that. That's the Organization of American States, who is part of the core group. Other members of the core group include ambassadors from Brazil, Canada, France, Haiti's original colonizer, Spain, and the European Union, as well as the U.S. So that is the core group. Members of the UN Secretary General, the Organization of American States, and ambassadors from Brazil, Canada, France, Spain, the European Union, and the United States. The core group has made itself basically the arbiter of Haitian politics. They run the Haitian government, y'all. Once they pushed out Aristide, they put in place the puppets they want. They've done this 2 motherfucking times. 2 motherfucking times. The guy that's in power right now, Moise Jovenel, is backed by the U.S. and the core group. The guy, Michael Martelly, who was like a fucking pop star before he became a dictator, who had no political background whatsoever before he was made into a puppet, was put in place by the core group, y'all. So this is like, they are not elected. They are not accountable to the masses of people in Haiti. You cannot go to their meetings. They have no website. They have no Twitter handle. They have like on paper they do not exist, but they literally run the state in Haiti. All these outside cracker ass powers run the state in Haiti. And so the U.S., the United Nations, and the core group have overthrown democratically elected leaders in Haiti, including Aristide, 2 motherfucking times. I keep saying that because it blows my mind. It blows my mind that the massive African people in Haiti have chosen Jean-Bertrand Aristide 2 times, and the U.S. and the UN and the core group have overthrown his ass 2 times. And then he came back to Haiti again in 2011, and he was still overwhelmingly popular, and they kept his ass out of power. They kept his ass out of power. Like, they are really so bold with that shit. Haiti keeps fighting to liberate itself. Haiti keeps fighting back. Haiti keeps rising up. He keeps picking the leaders it wants, and they keep overthrowing like the same dude 2 times. The same dude 2 times. Like, so trifling. So trifling. So the U.S., the UN, and the core group have overthrown democratically elected leaders in Haiti. They have armed and trained police and death squads to massacre Haitian people. Like Haitian police, the PNH, they are trifling, y'all. They are trifling. Right now, they have a hashtag solidarity movement for some motherfucking reason. Hashtag free Haiti. But the Haitian police have been like live firing on protesters who are protesting Moise Jovenel's dictatorship. They have gone to people's neighborhoods and like massacred them for organizing to overthrow the dictatorship. They are corrupt as hell. They basically answer directly to the U.S. and the core group and to the puppet-ass Haitian government, and they are not in any way accountable to the Haitian people. Those police are armed and trained by these imperialist powers that I'm talking about. And obviously, the U.S., the UN, and the core group have put in place dictators. They basically just don't want any kind of leader in Haiti that's going to be accountable to the Haitian people. They want leaders in Haiti that are going to allow them to loot and control Haiti. So they put in place a series of dictators that are going to do just that, with Moise Jovenel being just the most recent. But understand that Maj Javanel, even though he's a piece of shit, is not the primary problem in Haiti. The primary problem in Haiti is that the Haitian state is run by the US, the UN, and the core group. It's not run by the Haitian people, it's run by imperialist powers. So Maj Javanel is just a motherfucking puppet, y'all. This dictator in power right now would not be in power if not for the backing of the US and the UN and the core group. So understand, there's like this we published an article on the Hood Communist today that was called like Black Despot's White Power. Maj Javanel is the black despot, but he is backed by white power imperialism in the form of the US, the UN, and the core group. You can get Maj Javanel's ass the fuck up out of here. It looks like that's gonna happen. But they're just gonna replace him with another puppet. Y'all. Until the US and the UN and the core group are driven out of Haiti, Haiti will never be free. It doesn't matter who is president as long as those forces still exist and are still attempting to control the Haitian state. That is straight up motherfucking colonialism. That is white power imperialism. That is European cracker powers coming to an African nation and attempting to control that nation. That is what that is. Understand, Maj Javanel, Michael Martelly, puppets, neocolonial sellouts. The true power is the US, the UN, and the core group. And that is who needs to get the fuck up out of Haiti. I want to share a little bit more detail about the second occupation of Haiti that began in June 2024 with the US-backed coup that overthrew Aristide. So, like I said, Aristide was democratically elected by the masses of people in Haiti. The US did not want him there because he was democratic socialist, because he was trying to provide Haitian people with a government that was going to be accountable to them, that was actually going to help them. And so they overthrew him. They called him a dictator. They said Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was democratically elected by the people of Haiti, was a dictator. That is very, very common discourse when the United States wants to overthrow a government. They start throwing around the word dictator. So they said he was a dictator. They overthrew him. And then they said in order to like restore stability to Haiti, they like created the instability by overthrowing the government. But they said in order to restore stability to Haiti, we need to bring in a UN force, a UN military force, in order to occupy this nation. Because what had happened, that they overthrew Aristide the second time, and the mass of people in Haiti were like, no, thank you. Like, they have a long history of fighting for their liberation. They have a long history of resisting colonialism and imperialism. And so after the US-backed coup, they were like, absolutely not. We're not into this. Absolutely not. Like, you're not going to come in and tell us what to do. So they rose up. And so the US called in the UN to restore stability, which really meant brutally repressing the Haitian people that were fighting back against imperialism. That is the context for the UN occupation of Haiti. It was called for by the US, after the US-backed coup that overthrew Aristide. The UN occupation is known by the formal name of the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Haiti, also known as MINUSTA. It is a multi-billion-dollar military occupation that has seen in any given year between 6,000 and 9,000 foreign military troops from a coalition of nations in Haiti, in addition to police and thousands of civilian personnel. So Haiti is being straight up occupied by a coalition of foreign powers in this United Nations Stabilization Mission. Obviously, they were called in to help back up a coup that the Haitian people did not want, and so obviously this UN occupation was not going to be friendly to the Haitian people. It was there to repress them. And so while the UN has been in Haiti, they deliberately introduced cholera to the motherfucking water supply. And I say deliberately because they fucking admitted it. They said, yes, we did that, and also, we're not going to fix it. They deliberately introduced cholera to the water supply in Haiti, and that led directly to a cholera outbreak that killed 9,000 people and made hundreds of thousands of more sick. The UN military forces that came from places like the US, they came from places like Brazil. The troops that were there with the UN raped children and women. They introduced cholera deliberately, and they engaged in acts of mass rape. And now there are all of these like fatherless babies in Haiti that were born after rape by UN soldiers. The UN occupation was supposed to be to help Haiti, to stabilize Haiti, and instead they introduced an outbreak of a deadly disease and raped members of the Haitian population and produced a whole bunch of fatherless motherfucking babies. And this is openly admitted. The UN admit that they did this. They admit that they created a cholera outbreak. They admit that these rapes happened with these occupying soldiers. and they have refused to pay any kind of reparations or address the problem any kind. And again, this occupation began after the US-backed coup that overthrew a democratically elected president that the Haitian people chose. They brought in this occupying force to stabilize the country. When I say stabilize the country, I mean brutally oppress Haitian people that were fighting back against the overthrow of their government. So that is the UN occupation of Haiti. And that occupation led to the puppet government of Michael Martelly, who, like I mentioned, had no political background before the US put him in there. And the core group put him in there. He was a pop star. But he was willing to do what they wanted him to do. He was willing to oppress his own people. Now they put his ass in there. But yeah, that is the UN occupation of Haiti. I just wanted to describe that briefly. If anyone ever tells you that the UN has been a force for good in the African world, that person is motherfucking lying to you. The UN has been a force of colonization and imperialism for African liberation movements all over the world. Haiti, Africa, and Central and South America. The United Nations is really raggedy institution. It's mostly because the only forces that really have power in that body are imperialist powers like the United States and Europe. So the UN just does the bidding of the United States and Europe. So that's what that looks like. Anywho, so that is, I described the United States overthrowing the same guy 2 times after Haitians chose him 2 times. The United States has occupied Haiti 2 times, with the second occupation being ongoing. The Haitian state and government are controlled by outside forces, by the US, the UN, and the core group, which is by power imperialism. And so this is the current state of where Haiti is at. Marley was pushed out after the Haitian people rose up. The United States put in the second puppet, the current puppet, Moise Jovenel. Haitian people are rising up. They've actually been rising up continuously for over 3 years against the government of Moise Jovenel. And so at this point, the only reason Moise Jovenel is still in power is because of the support of the US, the UN, and the core. That's the only reason. Because if it was up to the Haitian people, he would already been out of there. The only thing holding that man up is the backing of the United States government, of the United Nations, and of the core group. Other things to know about the US relationship with Haiti. I've already described how Haiti was the first nation sanctioned by the United States government, and also after they overthrew Bertrand Aristide's government in 1994, the first time, they sanctioned Haiti. Actually, no, they sanctioned Haiti before they overthrew him in order to create conditions that were unlivable, and they called him a dictator. They said they were sanctioning Haiti because he was a dictator, and then they overthrew him. And then, like, as those sanctions were applied, like, thousands of people died in Haiti, because that's what sanctions do. They target the civilians in order to apply pressure to a government. Civilians suffer. But yeah. So the U.S. has sanctioned Haiti many, many times, including right before the coup that overthrew Aristide the first time. The United States has occupied Haiti, first time for 19 years, second time with the UN, beginning in 2004. The United States has put in place and backed dictators in Haiti. The United States funds and trains Haitian police and military forces that massacre Haitian civilians. And additionally, the United States has a white nationalist immigration policy that has seen successive Democratic administrations and Republican administrations, both parties do this, deport millions of people back to Haiti into conditions that are unlivable, created by the intervention of the United States. Let's talk about a couple of examples. First example, after so the U.S. sanctioned Haiti, they called Bertrand Aristide a dictator in 1994. They overthrew his government for the first time because they overthrew the same man 2 times. And then after the coup that overthrew Aristide in 1994, conditions became very, very severe in Haiti. There was like these police were terrorizing people. These U.S.-backed trained police were terrorizing people, massacring people. There was a lot of instability, and so many, many Haitian people fled. They fled Haiti to attempt to migrate to the United States. They got on boats. They tried to make it to the United States. The United States intercepted the boats, and they detained those Haitians fleeing instability created by the U.S.-backed coup at Guantanamo Bay. I just learned this a few weeks ago. The very first people ever illegally detained at Guantanamo Bay were Haitian immigrants fleeing unrest created by a U.S.-backed coup. They detained thousands of Haitian people fleeing instability created by the United States at Guantanamo Bay. Before they were torturing and illegally detaining Muslims at Guantanamo Bay, they did that shit to Haitians. to Haitians, to Haitian immigrants that were fleeing conditions created by the United States. Do you understand how much I hate the United States? Like, do you understand like how deeply I despise this empire? This is like one example. What I'm talking to y'all about is just like one example out of like an entire existence of fuck shit propagated by this place. The first people detained illegally at Guantanamo Bay, which is a military base on stolen Cuban land. The United States government straight up stole that land from Cuba and opened up a concentration camp. The first people detained at Guantanamo Bay were Haitian immigrants fleeing conditions created by a U.S.-backed coup. Oh my God, thousands of them. Thousands of them were held at Guantanamo Bay as they were trying to get away from the chaos created by the United States actions in Haiti that overthrew Austria the first time, because they overthrew the man 2 times. I just want to keep repeating this shit to drive it home how trifling the United States is, how trifling the relationship between the United States and Haiti. So the first people detained at Guantanamo Bay were Haitian immigrants fleeing conditions created by the U.S.-backed coup. And now, in 2021, Haitians are fleeing conditions created by the second U.S.-backed coup of Aristide under the Bush administration in 2004. First, they put in place Michael Martelly. Haitian people got his ass out of there. Then they put in place Maj Javanel. Maj Javanel is the current dictator in power in Haiti. Maj Javanel is sicking Haitian police funded and trained by the U.S. government on the mass of the people. These police are live firing on peaceful protesters that are calling for the end of this government and the end of U.S. imperialism in Haiti. And so some Haitian people are like, we gotta get the fuck up out of here. These are unlivable conditions. They are fleeing to the United States. They're making it to the U.S. border. Oftentimes they go, they travel through South America, through Central America, through Mexico to the U.S. border. So this is a trip of thousands of miles that is extremely dangerous through many, many neo-colonial governments that are anti-African. So these Haitians are being subjected to barbaric conditions to attempt to make it to safety because the United States made their home unlivable. They make it to the U.S. border. They get detained in immigration detention facilities. And immigration detention facilities in the United States are concentration camps. We are in a global pandemic right now. We are seeing COVID-19 has killed over 500,000 people in the United States. And that's outside of prisons and detention centers. But within prisons and detention centers, this virus is largely spreading unchecked. People in immigration detention facilities in the United States, whether they are publicly or privately owned, are not being given access to tests. They're definitely not being given access to vaccines, and they're not being given access to medical care. So these patients go through this like thousands of mile journey that is extremely dangerous. That they only have to do because of the action of the United States. They make it to the United States, and then they're fucking locked up in these facilities where COVID is spreading out of control, where kids are getting raped by border patrol officers, where families are being like kids are being like ripped from their parents. And these are conditions that Haitians find themselves in when they make it to the United States. And then, after being held in these facilities without trial, without access to representation, with COVID spreading out of control, they are deported. They are deported back to Haiti on flights that happen every week. There's an average of 125 people on each flight. The United States is locking them up in facilities where they're catching COVID-19, and then it's deporting them back to Haiti, back to conditions where the U.S. is backing a fucking dictator. That is the relationship of the U.S. to Haiti in 2021. The U.S. is propping up a dictator that is killing Haitian people at the U.S.'s command. And then when Haitians flee those conditions and try to make it to better conditions in the United States, they're being held in facilities where they catch COVID and then being deported back to fucking Haiti to deal with the dictator again. Deal with the dictator again. And you might think that what I just described was happening under Trump, but no. It's happening under Biden. It's happening under the administration of Democratic President Joe Biden and the first African U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. The Biden administration has deported hundreds of Haitian people since January 20th. Now I think it's up to thousands of Haitian people since January 20th. You might have heard that he signed a deportation moratorium that was supposed to stop evictions. Nope. Not evictions, deportations. The deportations of these Haitian people, which include unaccompanied infants and children, like literally they put like babies on these deportation flights by the motherfucking selves back to Haiti. This has continued unabated, and the deportation moratorium would never have stopped it. It wasn't the fact that a judge is contesting it. It's the fact that the deportation moratorium would not have impacted these deportations. That shit was a bunch of bullshit. I saw people celebrating that shit, and then I was a little bit deeper, and I thought deportations never stopped. The Biden administration has deported over 100,000 people and is on track to deport 800,000 people in 2021 alone. Y'all thought that electing Joe Biden was going to be better for immigrants? You are out of your mind. You're out of your mind. U.S. immigration policy cannot become more humane because U.S. imperialism is not becoming more humane. The U.S. is still propping up dictators. The U.S. is still overthrowing governments. The U.S. is still backing forces that are brutalizing people and creating unlivable conditions throughout the Western Hemisphere and Africa and Asia. So understanding that, understanding imperialism is still driving people from their homes, there's absolutely no way that U.S. immigration policy could ever become more humane. Unless the U.S. government stops fucking with other places, they're not going to have a more humane immigration policy because it's going to, these imperialist policies of the U.S. government create conditions where people are fleeing their homes by the tens of thousands, by the hundreds of thousands. The white nationalist ass U.S. is not going to let those people in. So what does that mean? It means that U.S. immigration policy will never become more humane. It will never become more humane. Until imperialism stops, it could not possibly. The people that were like, Biden is the lesser of evil, Biden's gonna be better for undocumented immigrants, and at least Biden is just as bad as Trump, and at least they won't do family separations. None of that shit was true. None of that shit was true. And I tried to tell people, no one listened to me, and now we're seeing it. We are seeing it. We are seeing it. The U.S. is backing up a dictator in Haiti. It is funding and training police that are massacring Haitian civilians, and it's deporting Haitian people back to those conditions. Back to those conditions. It's just going to get worse. It's just going to get worse because the Biden administration has no intention of ending U.S. imperialism. They're only going to escalate it. As U.S. imperialism escalates, immigration policy is going to get much more and more inhumane. So yeah, that is the U.S. immigration policy towards Haiti under the Biden administration. So just to summarize what I've broken down for y'all today, right now a puppet, a black despot, as hood communists put it, is in power. His name is Maj Javanel. There have been continuous uprisings of the masses of African people in Haiti for over 3 years to attempt to get this man out of power. But people in Haiti understand very clearly that he is just one in a series of puppets. The true power behind these black despots is white imperialist power, y'all. It is the United States. It is the United Nations. And it is the core group. And to remind y'all what the core group it is the representatives from the UN Secretary General. It is the Organization of American States. And it is representatives from Brazil, Canada, France, Spain, the European Union, and the US. That is who actually runs the Haitian government. Maj Javanel, Michael Martelly, the person they're going to put in power after Maj Javanel, because that man's out. That man's out. People in Haiti have been rising up for 3 years. The U.S. government and the UN and the core group have realized they cannot contain it. And so Maj Javanel's time is up. They're going to get his ass out of there. But it's not, that's not going to mean liberation for Haiti. They're just going to put another puppet in there. So understand, for Haiti to be free, the U.S., the UN, and the core group have to be driven out of Haiti. U.S. out of Haiti, UN out of Haiti, core group out of Haiti. Maj Javanel is a puppet. Maj Javanel is a sellout. Maj Javanel is powerless without white power imperialism. So even if he goes, if the U.S. and the UN and the core group are still there, then Haiti is not free. Those forces have to be removed from the equation in order for Haiti to realize its liberation. Maj Javanel is a puppet. The real power is white imperialist power. The Haitians have faced invasions. They have faced occupations. They have faced death squads. They have faced attacks on their culture. They have faced demonization. They have faced economic plunder. They have faced forced dictators, all put in place by the U.S., by the UN, and the core group. That is the real power behind Haiti's oppression. It's very, very easy to make the puppet, to make Maj Javanel or Michael Martelly the problem, but understand that man would have no power. Those men would have no power without the backing of white power imperialism. And so we, as Africans living in the United States, we as Africans in solidarity with Haiti have to elevate this. We have to put light on what the U.S. government is doing in Haiti. We have to let people know that even if one puppet goes out of the way, if the U.S., the UN, and the core group are still there, Haiti is not free. Haiti is not free. Haiti has been fighting back. Haiti is doing what it needs to do. We need to show up for Haiti the same way that Haiti showed up for us. We have to demand that the U.S. get its hands the fuck up out of Haiti. That the UN gets its hands the fuck up out of Haiti. That the core group get its hands the fuck up out of Haiti. Do not accept any narrative that says Haiti is unstable because Haitians can't get it together. If Haitians were left alone, if the US and the UN and the core group got the fuck up out of there, Haiti would be free, y'all. Haiti knows how to liberate itself. Haiti knows how to run a sovereign state. Haitians are not the problem. White power imperialism is the problem. So if you are an African living in the United States and you are listening to me speak, you owe Haiti a debt. If you're an African and you are in the Western Hemisphere, you owe Haiti a debt. And you can repay that debt by elevating what is happening to Haiti, what is being done to Haiti. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. Lobby for the U.S. government to get the fuck up out of there, to get their hands off of Haiti. They need international solidarity. They need the support of Africans throughout the diaspora. The same way they showed up for us, we have to show up for them. The U.S. out of Haiti, United Nations, get the fuck up out of Haiti, and core group, get out of Haiti. That's my spiel. It's been an hour. Let me see what y'all are saying. I see a lot of comments. Mac says a debt. I know Mac agrees with me. Sam says spitting. Thank you. Mac says Hillary Clinton is going to hell. I agree. I wish I could have talked about the Clintons more, but already like overtime. But Monique actually broke it down at the last show, so hopefully y'all remember. If not, I'll share the link to the last show. Yeah. Hope says abolish the U.S. and all of the core group. Yup, U.S. out of Haiti and also U.S. out of Turtle Island. The U.S. has like no right to exist. The U.S. was born through slavery, genocide against indigenous nations, and theft of land. The United States exists as a superpower because what it does to Haiti, it does all over the fucking world. That's the only reason the U.S. empire exists, because it leeches off with the rest of the motherfucking planet, particularly African, indigenous, and colonized nations. So understanding that, you have to understand that the U.S. has no right to exist. If a nation can only exist by being a parasite, if a nation can only exist by brutally repressing other nations, if a nation can only exist through coups and invasions and death squads, that nation has no right to exist. And there's never been a point in U.S. history where it was not built on a foundation of that kind of violence. So understanding that, I would much, much, much rather have indigenous people take their land back and build something with some humanity, build something based on justice, than have to deal with this motherfucking raggedy ass empire. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So U.S. not only out of Haiti, but U.S. out of Turtle Island. This empire has no right to exist. This empire has been ain't shit for hundreds of years. Like from the very beginning, it's been ain't shit. It's always gonna be ain't shit. It needs to go, y'all. It needs to go. But lucky for us, it's like the youngest empire on the face of the planet. For the majority of the Earth's history, for the majority of human history, the U.S. did not exist. So it's very, very new, and hopefully it dies soon. I'm going to do everything in my power to contribute to the U.S. falling, indigenous people getting their land back, because anything that indigenous nations build on this land will be so much better than what currently exists. Like, fuck the United States. Hope says, all European crackers in our homelands and beyond, doodah crackers. I love you, Hope. Monica shared a call to action from the Haiti Action Committee press release. They're asking folks to let me get some water. Get like all hype, and then I like get thirsty and my mouth gets dry. I start stumbling on my words, so I'm gonna pause. Okay, so Monica shared a call to action from the Haiti Action Committee press release for this Day of Solidarity. Haiti Action Committee is asking for folks to contact their congressional representatives, their Senate members, and also the Secretary of State, demanding the U.S. get the fuck up out of Haiti. The demands are to end U.S. recognition and support for the dictatorship of Jovenel Moise. It is to end U.S. funding of the criminal Haitian police and security forces, end the UN and U.S. occupation of Haiti, and support the Haitian people's movement for democracy and self-determination. So please send emails, phone calls, tweets, to your U.S. representative, to your senator, to the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and to President Joe Biden, elevating those demands. Monica put in the chat a contact form where you can send those demands, as well as Joe Biden's @ so you can harass him all day. I'm just going to copy and paste what Monica, actually, is it in the press release? I'm going to copy and paste what Monica put. So please, you got some free time today, you feel like harassing your Congress rep or the U.S. president or the Secretary of State on Twitter, please do that. I just put that information out again for saying that. Fire emojis, angry faces. Hope says they will never stop either. U.S. imperialism will never end. So abolition is necessary for our liberation and for everywhere. 100% correct. Bird says abolish the U.S. and land back. He's the way he says the American capitalist shitsome must be destroyed. Strongly agree. So thank y'all so much. That was the political education section on Haiti. If you have additional comments or thoughts or resources you want to share, feel free to put those in the chat. But I am tired of talking, so I'm going to start to wrap up the show. Thank y'all so much for watching. Please check out that call to action I just put in the chat. And now, let's get into the closing. So as I mentioned, today is the International Day of Solidarity with Haiti, called for by the Haiti Action Committee. So please participate in this Day of Solidarity if you have capacity to do so. I also want to mention that there are multiple organizations organizing in solidarity with Haiti, multiple coalitions organizing in solidarity with Haiti. So if you don't have capacity today, there's going to be additional opportunities to show up in solidarity. I'm trying to keep talking so I can find the other resource. Hold on. Because there's another Day of Solidarity with Haiti coming up, organized by Black Alliance for Peace, coalition with others. Okay, I found it. So Monday, March 29th, 2021, there's going to be a second Day of International Solidarity with Haiti. There's going to be demonstrations in Montreal, Canada, in Boston, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Miami, Santo Domingo, San Juan, Caracas, Venezuela. It is organized by the Black Alliance for Peace, by the Community to Mobilize Against Dictatorship in Haiti, by community movement builders, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, a number of anti-imperialist organizations basically in coalition. Again, this International Day of Solidarity with Haiti, the second one is happening Monday, March 29th, 2021. So if you can't participate today, you got another chance coming up in just about a week. Actually, no, less than a week. Nope, in a week. I'm using my birthday as the timeline. Birthday is March 26th. I'm like, is it before or after my birthday? It's after. You have a week to prepare a solidarity action for the second Day of International Solidarity happening Monday, March 29th. But please, 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 African people, if you can hear my voice, we owe Haiti a debt. Let us show up in international solidarity with Haiti, participate in these days of solidarity, elevate the demands of the Haiti Action Committee, tell your friends and comrades and family members about what the U.S. and the UN and the core group are doing for Haiti. Let's show up for Haiti the way that Haiti showed up for us. Also, we do weekly Pan-African news every single Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time, as I mentioned, which means we're going to be back next week with another program. We're going to be doing a presentation next Thursday called Class Struggle in African America, where we talk about class contradictions within the African community. So it's a good program. We're going to talk about how rich Africans like Jay-Z and Beyonce are selling us out, and how African people who are poor working class have to unite and organize. It's really good. So please tune into that next Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. Also, Comrade Ajamu in the California chapter of the APRP has a weekly program as well with his daughter Shakura. They broadcast every single Sunday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time on Ajamu's Facebook page, which is facebook.com/ajamu.umi. You can also watch the program on the APRP International YouTube channel. This coming Sunday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, they're going to be presenting on revolutionary African women soldiers. People always talk about revolution like it's a dude's project. Revolutions are solely waged by men with guns by themselves. But in reality, revolutions organize and mobilize entire societies, all sectors of that society. Not just men, but also women, but also queer and trans folks, elders, disabled people, children. In order for a revolution to be successful, all sectors of that society must be organized to build the revolution. And so they're going to be talking on their show about revolutionary African women that help build revolutionary struggles throughout the African world. So please tune on to that Sunday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time on the APRP International YouTube channel, as well as Ajamu's Facebook page. My name is Anya Sanmu. This has been Weekly Pan-African News, presented to you by All African People's Revolutionary Party, New Mexico. We do this every single Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. I want to end by saying, if you are listening to me talk and you are not active in an organization fighting for justice, we need you off the sidelines. We need you in an organization fighting for justice. If you're African, please consider joining the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You can contact us at aprpnewmexico@gmail.com. Even if you're not in New Mexico, hit us up and we'll find the chapter closest to you. If you're not African, find the organization that is your political home. There are comrades from the Red Nation. There are comrades in the Brown Berets. There their comrades in Black Rose, all up in our comments, y'all. So there are many, many, many options for organizations fighting for justice to join. And so even if you're not African or if the APRP is not for you, you have so many options for organizations to join. And I guarantee you all those organizations need help. That's like the nature of radical work. It's like always like a handful of people doing like a lot of shit, and being very tired. So I guarantee you there's an organization near you fighting for justice that needs help. But if you don't want to join the APRP, you don't want to join an organization that already exists, then start your own organization. If the organization you want to see does not yet exist, build that organization. All you need is like 2 friends and a book to read together, and you're already on your way. So if you don't want to join the APRP, if you don't want to join an organization that already exists, then start your own. That also counts. But understand that we must be organized to take out capitalism, to take out imperialism, to take out colonialism, which means that every single person fighting for justice must be an active member of an organization, fighting collectively justice. So once again, my name is Onya Sanmu. I am a cadre member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. This has been Weekly Pan-African News. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next week.